My name is Lori Schleicher. I'm one of 6 medical oncologists that works in the cancer center here at Newark, Beth, Israel. In terms of treating breast cancer, it really is a group effort. It involves a lot of different specialists in terms of the physicians, as well as nursing staff, other healthcare professionals, and a lot of support staff. We work closely with the surgical oncologist, the radiation oncologist. We have breast cancer navigators, we have geneticists, and we have a whole research staff. So if you just take a moment to look behind you, you'll see some of our doctors, our research staff, our nursing staff, and it really is a group effort, as I said, to take care of breast cancer. It's complicated. There's a lot of different moving pieces that we've got to coordinate, and that's why we usually all meet together in a breast tumor board to help coordinate care for patients. And one other thing we focus on and we want to improve is enrollment on clinical trials. We definitely believe that the future of cancer care really is dependent on clinical trials, and this is the way we're going to make progress. So without more ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Omene, who's going to speak to us more about this. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Lori, Dr. Schleicher, for that welcoming statement and for hosting us today. It's been pretty great so far. We're very happy to be here. Dorothy and I have been doing this now for a number of times this past year, and in the pandemic. So a lot of this has been on Zoom, virtually. So it's really great to be able to interact and have this conversation, very important conversation, in person. I think there is a lot more value in that. So we're very grateful that you all made it here today. So for those who may not know me, my name is Dr. Omene. I am a medical oncologist. I treat breast cancer patients exclusively, and I am a breast cancer researcher. So I do both translational and clinical research, and I work over at Rutgers Cancer Institute of New Jersey. And as you know, the Institute and NBI, as well as a number of other sites, we are all part of the RWJBarnabas Health System. And so I will pass it on to Ms. Reed to introduce herself, and we'll go from there.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm happy to be here with Dr. Omene. Like she said, we've been doing this traveling caravan for a couple of times now, a couple of months. My name is Dorothy Reed. I'm the co-founder and president of Sister to Sister, which is located in Somerset, New Jersey. Our mission is to take outreach, education, and support to women with breast cancer and those women that's in the community. We started the organization in 2000, so we're 23 years old, because myself and 3 other breast cancer survivors felt that there was not enough information in the Black community. So therefore, we formed our own organization. And with that, we found out there was a lot of different things and reasons why women did not keep up with their treatment. So just starting a support group led to hosting educational workshops. It led to raising money for women that's going through treatment. That's one of the things that we do. That's the main mission of our organization, because we found that women who are going through treatment is not something you do in a month or two. Sometimes it takes you a year, like it took for me. So sometimes your money get tight, or you get laid off at your job, or you're getting part of a salary. So with that, we started doing fundraisers like our 5K walk that's coming up. We have a golf tournament. With the monies we raise, we put back into our breast cancer assistant program, and that's the money we give away to our individuals. 2 years ago, we also branched out. We started a second chapter in Plainfield, New Jersey. So it's called Sister to Sister Plainfield chapter. And again, we just want to be more in the community to reach women, to bring them awareness, let them know what their options are, and this to help them through the breast cancer journey.
So I'm just going to have a brief presentation, which hopefully will be, for those who may not be aware, be an introduction about the aim of why we're here, which is to increase awareness and participation of Black women in breast cancer clinical trials. So what I like to do is give a brief presentation about clinical trials, the importance of why Black women should participate in clinical trials, and then hopefully that would then allow people to ask questions and maybe have some of their questions already answered. Before I start, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge why it's possible for us to be here today. So this mission project that Dorothy and I have been on is part of a larger mission project that I lead at CINJ to involve as well sites in our health system. This program is funded by the V Foundation for Cancer Research in partnership with ESPN from a grant that they gave to us. And of course, Susan G. Komen, whose tables I'm sure you saw outside before you came in today, who we have a very strong collaborative educational series networking that we do, especially this past year. We've had several of these educational series so far, and they very enthusiastically decided to partner with us today to be able to bring this program to bear. And so I thank Susan G. Komen very much for this as well. So the focus really, when we are talking about breast cancer and clinical trials, the underlying rationale for this conversation, which I'm sure you may hear about as well in other forums, is due to one simple fact, the fact that there are breast cancer disparities that exist in cancer care between underrepresented minority groups and especially among Black women. So in general, about 280,000 women in the US will develop invasive breast cancer every year. And unfortunately, about 40,000 of them will die from the disease. It is the second leading cause of cancer death in women after lung cancer, but the leading cause of cancer death in Black women. From about 89 to 2015, breast cancer death rates decreased by a substantial amount, by 39%, translating to over 320,000 breast cancer, averting over 320,000 breast cancer deaths in the US. During the same time, while death rates decreased in all racial ethnic groups, however, Black women continued to have higher breast cancer death rates than non-Hispanic white women, with mortality rates up to 40% higher in Black women. And this is clearly depicted in this slide. If you look on the left, a female breast cancer survival data by race and ethnicity, you can clearly see the green line, which is African Americans, and you can see that the survival is much lower than all of the other racial ethnic groups. So whether that be non-Hispanic white, Hispanic, Native American, Asian American, Native Pacific Islander, which are all clustered above, you can clearly see that for Black patients, that survival is lower. And when you focus primarily on just comparing between Black and non-Hispanic white patients, you can see that on the top slide, on the top part of the curve, the incidence between Black and white women stabilized and converged and sort of stabilized over the past decade, right, between white and Black. And then when you look at mortality itself, where due to advances in technology and treatment and screening, where, as I mentioned, mortality rates declined, which is good, but you can clearly see that Black women continue to have substantial higher mortality rates than white women, despite the gains that we have made in the past decades. And we know that there is no one snapshot answer about why that could be. It is multifactorial. But we also know that there are ways in which we can try to merge this disparity and close this gap. And one of the key ways we know to do that is through clinical trials. Now, what are clinical trials? Very simply, clinical trials are research studies that test how well new methods of screening, prevention, diagnosis, or treatment of a disease are in people. They are the final step in a long process that begins with many years of research in the lab and in animals. They test the safety and benefits of new treatments. They can also test new combinations or new doses of standard treatments. They take place both nationally and internationally in many, many types of medical centers and hospitals, and tend to be funded by government agencies like the NCI, pharmaceutical companies, or non-for-profit foundations. And what's clearly known over the many years is that the significant improvements that we have made in breast cancer treatment has been made over the years due to findings from clinical trials. So this brings us to the point of these disparities in clinical trials. As I've mentioned, Black women have significantly higher breast cancer death rates compared to white women. And we have seen that clinical trials are important in solving the differences that exist in cancer healthcare between Black and white patients. Unfortunately, Black women are substantially underrepresented among cancer clinical trials. And the reasons are many. There's issues of trust, worries about experimentation, communication issues, access and logistical issues have been most commonly identified. And unfortunately, because of their lower participation, any positive outcomes from such clinical trials may then not be relevant to Black patients. So it's important to have clinical trial participants be similar to that of the general population so that any development of new drugs or interventions from these clinical trials are effective for everyone in the population. Now, I want to use an example to actually stress and bring home this point. So I'm going to focus now on a clinical trial that was designed for Black women with breast cancer. Some of you may already know this here. I believe this was open here at the NBI probably. But this is a clinical trial sponsored by a large cooperative group called ECOG Akron, titled Prospective Validation Trial of Taxane Therapy. Taxane is a type of chemotherapy of which docetaxel or paclitaxel, which are different types of taxane chemotherapy agents, which are commonly used in breast cancer. And so they want to look at a validation trial of using these chemo agents and the risk of chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy in Black women. Now, peripheral neuropathy is numbness and tingling, which can occur in your hands and your feet, and it can be very painful when it's severe and can be debilitating if it's so severe that, you know, sometimes patients can't feel their hands to hold a pen or button the buttons of their shirt. So this can be pretty significant. So the significance of this study was to reduce the increased risk of chemo-induced toxicity for African-American patients with breast cancer by identifying the preferred taxane based on both potential for being effective and the toxicity, i.e. the peripheral neuropathy, and identifying which agent can be used for cure for Black women with breast cancer. So as I mentioned, you can see from the eligibility criteria on the left, women who are self-diagnosed as African American, Black, or of African descent are the patients that enrolled into this study. So patients with early stage breast cancer coming in for cure, as long as they were going to get a taxane chemo agent as part of their treatment regimen, they were eligible for this trial. And the trial will then put them in different arms based on what type of taxane chemo they were going to receive. Then peripheral blood samples were taken, as well as what are called patient-reported outcomes over the course of the study to follow for toxicity, side effects, quality of life, and so on. So the underlying rationale of why they set out to do this at all is they went back to a number of breast cancer trials that they had already done, that had already yielded results of which is how we treat patients today. They went back to look at samples and do analysis and sequencing of all of this data they had collected. And what they found was that a good percentage of Black patients were experiencing peripheral neuropathy with taxane chemotherapy, about 39%. From their sequencing, they noticed that patients that had this rare mutation in SBF2, about 65% of them were having peripheral neuropathy. Same also as another mutation in FCMAR, compared to those who had lower incidence of neuropathy. They didn't have as much of they didn't have this mutation. They were either wild type or they had different types of mutations. So they were able to put into different categories those who were high risk for getting the neuropathy or low risk, depending on whether they had these mutations, right? So this trial essentially will prospectively then look at whether their findings from their retroactively looking at the data from the past, whether that holds to be true now going forward prospectively. So I mentioned this. We know that Taxol is associated with reduced rates of breast cancer recurrence. We know that Black patients have substantially higher risk of experiencing neuropathy. Now, this is the crux of the matter. So what they found in the studies, right? What do we do when patients complain of side effects? We want to help them out, so we reduce the dose of the chemotherapy that you're receiving. And of course, that's embedded in every clinical trial. There are guidelines about how to dose reduce to help those patients out with side effects. But this is what they found, that while toxicity led to more dose reductions, as one would expect, unfortunately, it led to higher breast cancer recurrent rates in Black women when their dose was reduced. And so this slide, if you remember nothing else, but please just look at this slide. On the left are patients with European ancestry, on the right, African ancestry. In red were those for patients whose doses were reduced, and black for those who didn't need any dose modification, the doses were maintained. Look at the disease-free survival of white patients versus Black patients when their doses were reduced due to the fact that they had neuropathy. You can clearly see that survival was affected for Black patients. If you reduce your doses when you think you're doing something helpful, unfortunately for them, they are actually having poorer survival because of that. And that's not the case for non-Black patients. And so this is why it's crucial, right, that Black women participate in clinical trials. We would never know this. We would never know this if there were not Black patients in clinical trials that one could then look at their samples, do sequencing, figure out, make correlations between your toxicity they were getting with some genetic mutations, and then try to now prospectively try to validate this finding so that hopefully if this turns out to be the case, then one could argue for interventions to be made for these patients right off the bat, because you know that they are more likely to have neuropathy, and you know that if you were to dose reduce them, that they would have poorer disease-free survivals. And so this, I thought, was a very good example of why it is Black women should participate in clinical trials, and is highlighted very specifically in this trial by ECOG, where they are prospectively they designed a trial for Black women to answer this question, and you can see why we have to know the answer to this question. And so there are many investigators all around who are doing work in disparities-related research where we're trying to close the gap by doing research like this, but I hope that this conveyed why this is very important, that Black women participate in these trials. So to summarize why clinical trials are important, people are living longer from cancer treatments that are a result of past clinical trials that are now standard of care on how we treat patients. They tend to determine whether the new treatments are safe, effective, work better than the current treatments, regardless of race, age, or gender. These trials can find new ways to prevent and detect cancer, and they can improve the quality of life for people during and after treatment. And by and large, they add to our knowledge about cancer and help to improve cancer care for future patients. So not only the potential to benefit from the trials if you participate, But even if that patient doesn't benefit necessarily, but the findings that they get can only help future patients as the research moves forward. So clinical trials are the key to making progress against breast cancer. And I'm going to leave this slide up here for if you have any questions for Dorothy or I, or how you can reach our clinical trial office to gather more information about clinical trials, and also to where you can have participate in clinical trials in our health system. They can guide you, and of course, the staff here at MBI can also tell you how you can reach their office if you want to know about clinical trials here in this center. So I will stop here now, and Dorothy and I will be up here in front, and there's a mic that'll be passed around to take questions.
Hi. So,
I think there's a mic.
sorry, the question that I have is, the women that you want to participate in the clinical trial, at what stages do you want them to participate in it? Is this when they become, if they have cancer, or, you know, a certain type of cancer, or?
So that's an excellent question, which has come up in the past. So I can tell you this right now. Clinical trials are for everybody. Everybody, regardless of race, ethnicity, age, gender, everybody. You will see the eligibility criteria will say that it's unethical. It's unethical to say that, you know, someone from a race or gender, religion can't participate. It's absolutely unacceptable and would not pass the review board. So everyone can participate. And now in terms of when can you participate, that's a great question. So at any phase of a woman's treatment journey, they can participate in a clinical trial if they are eligible for one. They may be, you know, on a standard of care treatment that is the best that we have, and there's maybe no research ongoing in that area, at least at that point in time. And then the patient is on standard of care, and that's acceptable. Actually, that's fine. But there may be trials that may come up, even if they've finished all their curative treatment already, and they may be on maintenance therapy. There are actually trials that have come up that we have open that are looking at comparing drugs that have been designed that may be better than the pill that you're taking right now. And so those trials will be written in such a way to say that patients could have been on their treatment already for 2 or 3 years, and they're allowed to switch or to participate, you know, in the trial. So those trials exist. So it doesn't matter if one is done with treatment. There could be a clinical trial that may be right for them even down the line. And so for early stage breast cancer patients who are going for cure, there are trials, many trials available. Similarly, for stage 4 patients who unfortunately may have metastatic disease, there are lots of clinical trials ongoing for them as well, because we're always trying to improve survival for those patients, especially with stage 4 disease, which, by the way, a lot of trials tend to start off looking in stage 4 because that's where it's more urgent, so to speak. And when those drugs are found to be very effective, then they bring them forward and design trials in the early stage setting so that we could see if perhaps we could even prevent those patients from becoming metastatic at all by continuing to decrease their risk and their chance of getting a breast cancer recurrence. So at any stage, one could be eligible for a clinical trial, and all races.
Yeah, I was wondering if this is just for breast cancer, or is it for all types of cancer?
When you say what this is for, clinical trials are for all kinds of cancer. So we're just speaking about breast cancer today, but I have to tell you that the same rationale, the same idea cuts across all cancers. There's a lot of disparities in other types of cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, where unfortunately Black patients fare worse. So this topic is relevant in virtually all cancers, and all cancers have clinical trials of their own as well that one can participate in. Dorothy?
Yes,
Yeah.
I just want to add, we're concentrating in this session for this clinical trial on breast cancer, simply because breast cancer, African American women have a 40% higher death rate than other ethnic groups. So that's why Dr. Omene went out and actually done this study to specifically look at Black women with breast cancer.
Is there a listing that you can get to let you know the different trials?
Absolutely. So if you call that number or stop by the desk, the tables out in front, you will see all information about the clinical trials to begin with and how you can get more information in our health system. So whether it be, I don't know where you may be close to, if you're close to NBI or you're close to CINJ where I am, or other parts of our network, you will see all of the listings there, and you can call and see what is available there. But you can stop and definitely get information about that.
You said, I know that you said there's different trials for everyone.
Yeah.
Is it for new medication or medication that's already established?
So that's a great question. So clinical trials, there are a wide variety of clinical trials. So we tend to speak a lot about treatment, right? Especially in this setting, but there is for screening to determine what, when it's best to screen and what types of testing to use for screening, what kinds of, imaging to use, MRIs or mammograms, how frequently. There's those types of trials that are ongoing. There's radiation trials even, right? So besides treatment, I'm a medical oncologist, so you're gonna hear me speak a lot about chemotherapy and pills and meds. But in terms of clinical trials, if we just focus on breast cancer, for instance, the ways in which we cure a woman are through surgery, radiation, medicine being different types of pills, IV drugs, or chemotherapy agents. So all of those departments work in concert, one after the other, to treat, to cure that woman. And each of those departments have clinical trials that woman could participate in. We have patients who are in radiation trials, as well as chemotherapy trials, all in this part of their treatment plan. So there are different kinds of clinical trials. If we're speaking about treatment, focusing on medicine, there are trials that are just by pill forms. There are trials that's a combination of pills. There are trials that are looking at new IV drugs. We're trying to back away from using a lot of chemotherapy. So there's lots and lots of new agents out there that are not chemotherapy. And those trials are there. And there are combinations. So sometimes you're looking at a new agent combined with the standard of care that we use together. So there are all different types of ways in which one can be treated in a clinical trial. But one thing you must know is that the patient is never shortchanged by depriving them from a standard of care treatment, right? So clinical trials will never be designed to deprive that woman of a standard of care treatment. So it's either going to be in combination, or comparing a drug that has already established itself to be likely to be superior. So they're doing large phase 3 to do a gold standard comparison. So it's if I get the sense of your question, you're wondering or curious about if something is not really, there's not much known about it and is being tested. So I want you to understand that there's no experimentation that goes on. Otherwise, it's unethical. It will never pass a review board, right? It has passed early phase stages of clinical trials to get to that point, right? So it has established itself by showing a lot of data preclinically, and then in early phase 1 trials, phase 2, and then now phase 3, where you're trying to determine whether that drug can now maybe become the new standard of care.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlotte. I guess I want to digress a little bit. I ran a a African American support group for over 15 years, starting in '97. Back then, a lot of the women that were in my group, they were not able to participate in trials. That's why I said I want to digress. When was it that we were looked at to be able to be in trials? And one of my members, when she was able to be in a trial, it was towards the end of her life, okay? And she was able to get into a trial, but I had other women, and the thing of it is that even though they wanted to be in the trials weren't able to take them. So when were we looked at? When did they start looking at us to be in these trials? I no longer run the group, but I am a 27-year breast cancer survivor, and it's because I am very, very aggressive, assertive when it comes to our women. And another reason is that a lot of times doctors did not look at like us, and that was another reason why there was a lot of mistrust. And I could go on, but I won't. But I'd like to know because, like I said, a lot of the women in my group at the time wanted to be in trials. There were no trials for them. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go first, and Dr. Omene can follow up. Charlotte, you're absolutely right. Years ago, I started the organization 20 years ago. No one was really interested in getting Black people in clinical trials. Clinical trials, they knew we were there, but everything was done on different ethnic groups. A lot of times, going back to, people remember Tuskegee, okay? And now this next generation may not even know about Tuskegee, but they know about George Floyd. So they're still wondering, do they really care about us getting into these clinical trials? I would just add that times have changed, okay? The researchers, the medical profession, doctors are all looking at this conquer cancer. So they're saying, if we're ever gonna win the war on cancer, we need everybody included. So that's when they started trying to reach out to African American communities to get us involved. I know in 2015, I went to Washington under Obama's administration, President Obama, and he gave out Champion of Change awards for different organizations that were willing to partner with the medical field and professional field. So Sister to Sister got that award as Champion of Change, because change is coming, change is here. If we can just put on a different hat for a while and remember when there were desk phones, now we have cell phones, okay? We took that change. There were typewriters, now we have computers. We went and we took that change. So things are changing the way they're changing in regular everyday life, they're changing in the medical field also. And what we're asking you to do is just be open-minded today, listen, start a conversation with your families about clinical trials. Get all the information you can get about clinical trials. And if you're ever faced with that decision, maybe you want to make a change and do that. Okay, because clinical trials do work. My own daughter was in a clinical trial. She had a breast cancer just like I did, and she had a choice to make. She had triple negative, and she made the choice at the end to get into the clinical trial. She's 7 years out, triple negative, and doing fine. So clinical trials do work. They are asking for our permission to come in. They're asking for the community to partner with hospitals. So things are changing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. So that's a great question. It's been pretty sad to see, right? Even now, just how Black patients are underrepresented in clinical trials. And the reasons are multifactorial. And just like Dorothy said, it has been a change, but very slowly. And I can tell you just from, just in my career, we, used to talk to patients about clinical trials, just a standard way for everyone, all comers. But that did not work. We did our best. Everyone does your best. We spent an hour talking about clinical trials, but we didn't go down to the nitty-gritty if a patient refused. And you said, okay, patient refused, and that's it. But over the years, we have known that we cannot use the same brushstroke for everyone. Every race, every population, they have their own, intricate issues that are unique to them, and we have to address those concerns directly so that we can then push through whatever the barriers exist that may not be allowing them to participate in a clinical trial. There are patients who will talk to you and they say, oh, I'll think about it, and they'll go home. And they may never share with us that they have problems with transportation to come, and just by getting that information, we could have helped them. And so unless you do a deep dive and really know that patient, really address whatever hesitation, whatever concerns or confusion, you can never know if you could potentially have addressed whatever issues may have made it impossible or difficult for them to participate in a clinical trial. So what I've noticed over the years is that that is changing. And there was a sort of acceleration in the way people talk about it now, right? So Dorothy brought up George Floyd. I can tell you during this pandemic era in the past 3 years, where it became, we've all known, right, that there's disparities in our population, but the pandemic sort of brought that out. The social injustice with George Floyd just sort of brought that out, where everything came together and it was in the conversation, and it's everywhere, right? And so what you find is that there's a lot more intentional effort in the past few years. I can at least speak to that, where everyone knows that this is a crisis and one has to do something about it. That whatever we were doing before is not enough, is not sufficient, no matter how hard we worked. It obviously, we were failing the community, because you look at trials and the trial participation for Black patients or Black women would be like 3%. Okay, tell me, is that drug, do we really know if it works for them? But we're going to give it to them when it's FDA approved. Do we know if they have different side effects that we should be aware about, or different biomarkers we should look for that maybe they don't benefit from the drug? We can't really know that if there's such few patients of color in that clinical trial. So what you've seen now, and even the FDA, their guidelines have been changing over the past handful of years, where you're actually telling the pharma companies to make sure that they have a guideline, have a plan of how they're going to reach out to the community for the trials that they are designing. That's actually FDA now, FDA mandated now in the past couple of years. So the change has been slow in coming, for sure. And the damage is there, where we have all this data about the disparity in healthcare outcomes because of this over the years. And I think now in the past few years that a lot of people, know that this is a crisis and we have to do something about it. And this is, part of that is changing hearts and minds, addressing concerns, misinformation, anything we can do in our small way to try to change the tide of that outcome. Okay.
Studies, but the problem is they don't disseminate enough information for us to even take back to our family. Most of it has been very statistical, but not about telling us how to communicate with our families, who to research. I've known about clinical trials for years, and it's only because I've had all my screenings that they caught my cancer very early. But younger people, I have a daughter that's 50, she hardly knows half of what I know. The information is just not out there for the average Black woman to find on her own. And you expect that where I went for my breast cancer, the literature was so sparse, I knew more before I got there. I didn't know all the particulars, I didn't know the medication, but I've been aware of these things for years. But in-depth information is just not available for us to share. It's like a big unknown once you say cancer.
Okay, and I agree with that. And that's one reason why we started our nonprofit organization for African American women, because we felt that the information was not in our community. So right now I can say I partner with Dr. Omene, who works out of Robert Wood Johnson, which is CINJ. It's the state's only NCI designated comprehensive cancer center. And if you go there, I know you're going to get the different literature you're talking about, but we can't say every hospital is doing that. I think hospitals are trying to get on board, but you're absolutely right. Our color sometimes still stops them. Sometimes we're just not shared information. Sometimes the way the doctor is speaking, maybe you don't quite understand it. So it's good to ask questions. It's good to come out to things like this so you can find out, where that information is and you can get the correct information.
Okay, guys, just keep the questions coming, and I'm gonna help out. Just raise your hand, and we'll pass the mic. I'll start right here.
Hi, yes. I just want to commend CINJ and this forum here because it's because of spaces like this and to hear about collaborations and that you get to tap on everyone here to be an ambassador to carry the word. I've been doing this for over 19 years. I did clinical research right here at Newark Beth Israel Medical Center, and part of a Komen grant was to really expose awareness and advocacy for for the Black and brown communities, especially women in breast cancer. And again, it's been a 19-year journey in understanding now what we have in the RWJBarnabas Health Institution to now collaborate across the state with the same efforts of getting the information out there. This is what it takes. It takes the whole village, that we all become advocates and ambassadors of this word and this information, to understand that clinical trials is not an experiment, but it's a treatment option, and that everybody should know about these different treatment options at different stages of the cancer, whether it's during the surgery, before the surgery, or for treatment and radiation. So I think this is a great opportunity and a great forum and a great audience to have here to be ambassadors of the word, including adding on to what people have done for years. Hey, Charlotte. And to say that here are these bands together that we can now really lift up the voice, and we have the medical and clinical team there that's now looking at the statistics to see how the treatments, in fact, impact or create better outcomes for our population. So I think this is a great forum.
So just quickly, as a breast cancer survivor myself, I did do clinical trials, but ask me how I got on that list of clinical trials, I don't know. And I'm going to assume that it's just like being in a car accident or anything else, that you start getting all kind of letters and everything from lawyers. So probably because your name go in some type of system, that you start getting people calling you to participate in clinical trials. However, in my experience of doing these trials, I think that whoever comes to your home to conduct these trials, and I think that's probably why a lot of people are hesitant in doing them, because they can be very time consuming. But if you know how important clinical trials are, then maybe you would be more receptive of participating. And when I say that is that they came to my house, but all they did, I filled out a bunch of paperwork. They took my weight. They wanted to draw blood, which I didn't allow them to draw any blood, because being us going through everything that you already go through, you get enough people poking and prodding in your arm. And if you do have breast cancer, then depending on where it's at, mine was on the left side, so that means they can only take it out of this side. So this arm gets a lot of action. So I just think that whoever comes to your home need to be more, not to say that they're not knowledgeable, but they're not explaining to you the importance of this. They just coming in to do the job that they come in to do. Fill out sign this so we can do this. But what are you doing? And nobody's telling me, like, what is this going, what type of studies is this going towards? Yes, breast cancer, but what is it for? Why am I giving you my blood? What are you using that for? So I just think if people were explained more as to what's happening when they come do these trials, because I stopped it after. I just got tired after a while, because it's every day. It's like 4 or 5, not every day, but when they came out, it was like 4 or 5 hours of my time. And I'm coming in from work, then you taking it up another 4 or 5. So I just think more women would participate if the people that came into the homes were more knowledgeable.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience. So, I mean, I could defer to Dr. Schleicher and her team, who do a great job over here at MBI in talking to patients. I have to tell you that the staff they should be, and they usually are, trained to explain in detail the consent form, what it is that that patient, is expected, not expected, because the patient has to agree to it, right? So they really should be doing a good job of that. I'm sorry that your case was not that way, but I'm pretty sure that here at MBI, we have that experience of excellent reaching out.
Just real quick, my clinical trials didn't even come from NBI, by the way. It was actually representative from Rutgers that came to my house doing.
Yeah. So without knowing the details of the kind of trial you were participating in, like I mentioned earlier, there are so many different kinds of trials that some of them may not be you getting active treatment. They may be collecting samples for analysis based on what you may have had. Just different types of trials. But no matter what it is, you know, they should be well versed in explaining, and so that woman is comfortable. Once again, I'm sorry that was not your case, but that's not usually the case. And I see another hand up. There was something you mentioned that I wanted to address. It may come to me. It was something you said towards the latter part. It may come to me, but I will. I want to mention that. Yeah, yeah.
I just wanted to add to that. You're absolutely right. I probably would have stopped the trial too. Before you get into a trial, make sure they explain everything to you thoroughly. They explain how long it's going to take. You need to know all the details. Okay, and that's one thing I think that's changing now with clinical trials. They do try to sit down, let you know what's going to be happening before you even sign up to be in the trial. And then we're trying to stress too, and like we're doing this town hall here, that we need to start building like relationships with our community, not to just come in here, sign this, so that scientists can get their mark that I got this person in my clinical trial. We're trying to build relationships, let them know that this is a friendly hospital. Rutgers CINJ is a friendly hospital to come to. We listen to your concerns. We will listen to you. So things like that are changing too. Unfortunately, you didn't have a good experience with that.
Yeah, and just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of kind of how we do things here, which I think is similar to a lot of places, we start by all of our breast cancer cases are discussed in that group that I talked about, where different types of doctors get together along with nursing staff and other support staff to kind of figure out, because there's different parts of the treatment, like that was mentioned, radiation, surgery, maybe chemo, to kind of put together a plan. And at the same time, we try to say, hey, would this patient be eligible for any of the clinical trials that we have here? And then we also have some staff that's looking, even if we miss it from that meeting. And then when we have one of the first initial visits, we try to say, one of your other, go through the standard of care, which would, that's a treatment option. And then we also have this clinical trial, and we try to provide the information, basic information about the trial, so that the patient can go and review it with their family and think about it. And that's how we usually approach it here. You guys probably have a similar way that you go about it. So
exactly, yeah, that is standard. So I'm sorry that you didn't have a good experience, but that's not usually the case.
I'm finding out younger women are starting to have breast cancer. When I say younger women, the 30-year-olds are late 20s. My daughter just had a friend who was 31 that just passed from breast cancer. My daughter had some issues with her breast when she turned 28, 29, a lot of cysts, a lot of things she feels. But they wouldn't even give her a mammogram. They said the insurance wasn't going to pay for it. And I mean, it's like, I didn't know cancer had an age on it. I mean, you talked about the changes of life that people older may get it, but I didn't know cancer had an age on it. So I'm just concerned that we want our young women to know about their bodies. We want them to eat healthy. We want them to be healthy. I don't think cancer has an age on it. So I'm really concerned that the insurance companies are not paying for these girls who are concerned about their bodies to get the proper care.
That's a great point and a very disheartening one, right? So we know that breast cancer is not just for older women because we see it in our clinics all the time. Young patients, with aggressive disease, right? And so, like I mentioned, it's a number of factors. It could be genetics, genes that may not be known as of yet to be pathogenic in causing breast cancer, but you see families with lots of patients with breast cancer, and they'll say, "Oh, you don't have the gene," but yet that 25-year-old will show up with breast cancer, right? And may have a variant of what we call uncertain significance. So there are multiple reasons why, unfortunately, young women that we don't expect necessarily to develop cancer do. But it is even more disheartening that when they do have something suspicious, that insurance companies won't pay for it. Unfortunately, that's not my area of expertise. I share your frustration too, because we sometimes also have to, go to not do battle, but essentially get on the phone to talk to insurance companies to push for certain drugs or treatments that they may not consider appropriate, but we think should be given, right? So we do have those issues sometimes that we have to deal with insurance companies. They have their own criterias and agendas, and we have ours. And sometimes, speaking forcefully and being proactive and being an advocate for your patient and trying to get your point across, and going through appeals process, and sometimes that works out for that patient, but it shouldn't be that difficult. I agree with you. Just speaking about, mammograms. And so, I'm sure everyone has heard about the new guidelines that the task force put out, that it was okay for women to have this screening at age 40. Well, we've always known that. I'm like, you don't tell me that. Now they had their age 50 or whatever it was before, which I personally was not following. I was telling everybody 40. The American Cancer Society guidelines was what we were following, because we've always known that. And there was a JAMA publication in the past month that looked at all the different races and showed very clearly that Black women, if the task force was saying to start screening at age 50, that Black women were getting it almost 10 years earlier. And I think part of that publication, part of that data is what led them to change their guidelines, right? But fortunately, there were other guidelines that were also out that advocated for younger ages, so people followed that, and insurance would, by and large, because there were some guidelines. But it just shows you how there's still a lot of research that has to be done, and for the word to get out there to really look at the data and not use a one-size-fits-all approach for all comers. And so this is still a work in progress. Yeah.
The guidelines should go hand in hand. When you get a PAPS, you should get a mammo.
Okay, I just wanted to add to that. That was a good question. I know just last Friday, I went to a young woman's funeral. She was 42. She was diagnosed at 38. But in her case, too, I don't know, thought she was too young or something. So she looked like a couple of years were wasted. My heart breaks when I hear that, because when we started our organization 23 years ago, you heard that a lot. They would just say, "You're too young to have breast cancer," or "It's not in your family, just wait." But I'm hoping that doctors have gotten, primary doctors or whoever you first see, don't look at your age, but maybe ask a little more questions. And again, I hate to say it was on us to advocate for ourselves. A lot of times, if something's just not right, change doctors, move on, search, ask people, talk to people, because it's your life.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I just had a couple of points in mind. I just want to say that first, I identify with Ms. Lisa. I identify with really everything everybody's saying, but especially about. So when you're talking about clinical trials and you're talking about reaching out to our community, right? And you want to know where you are in the community where you're trying to reach out to Black women, right? So Newark Beth Israel Hospital, we're in the center, like it's a lot of African American women and women of color in our neighborhood. So I think that me being a survivor also 6 months. I was diagnosed 6 months ago. Thank you. Hear all of you ladies, years, you know what I'm saying? Y'all have been survivors for years and y'all have been through so much. And I think that I have been blessed because I had a team here at Newark Beth Israel that snatched me from diagnosis until I'm still sitting with them. But if I think about it, if it wasn't the way they approached me, if they didn't know how to come to me, if they didn't know how to talk to me, if they didn't know how to get me to identify with them, I wouldn't have been receptive to any of it. Because my first thought when I got diagnosed, I'm gonna make this real quick. When I got diagnosed with cancer, only thing I knew of cancer was death, because that's all that I saw, in my family. I didn't know no survivors. I didn't know no trials. I didn't know no, medication. I'm just saying that's all I knew. So what I'm trying to say is that when you're saying that you're trying to get people, you want to, reach out to women, you had that bad experience, people, so you have to train navigators. We gotta get with this, okay? So clinically, doctors can come, and we know the doctor got to do what they got to do. We understand that, right? But when you're talking about, we got navigators, I'm sorry, Miss Loretta, I'm gonna point you out. We have, navigators or peers, or your organization, but we have to start training up our young women too to go and talk to women, because I wouldn't have been comfortable talking to somebody about a clinical, I wouldn't have been comfortable talking to a doctor right now about a clinical trial, because I'm thinking like, shit, all they want to do is, I'm sorry. They just want to give me some medicine. You know what I mean? But so what I'm saying is that I think we need more programs to have people be trained up of how to talk to women that look like us.
That's absolutely correct.
I just want to say something. These two ladies can attest, because the support group that I ran from 97 to 215, we were out there. It was mandatory that we do certain things. We were in churches, whatever, in schools, we were all over. But the hardest part is getting our women to go further than just when we are out there with our tables, and we gave out a lot of information. So what is it that, sometimes there'd be 100 people out there and everything. And it got really frustrating after 15 years. And I was just doing everything, which I am quite sure they are doing too. And but back in the day, they weren't telling us about trials because we weren't involved in them, but we were still trying to get that information out. My daughters, who were much younger, because I was 49 when I was diagnosed, so they were in their 20s and teens, and they would come out and they would give out that information and also talk to teenagers, because we also knew that young people 19 years old and so were being diagnosed with breast cancer. My daughter was 23 and they didn't want to give her a mammogram. I said, I will pay for it. Because if you could get out there, some people, you get your nails done, you get your hair done, you get your toes done, but you don't want to spend money to get yourself done. So the whole thing about it is, if you got that money, save it up. And if you have to fight for the insurance and they don't do it, you can't work, I'm going to spend the money when it comes to my kids. There's nothing more important. I got 4 daughters, and I don't want them to go before me. And now I got granddaughters and grandsons, because men get breast cancer too. So the whole thing about it is, we worked our butt off, and for some reason, you just can't get people to do what they have to do. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Jacoby. I'm the medical director here at Newark Beth Israel, the Cancer Center. I work with Dr. Schleicher. And, you know, we've had this collaboration with CINJ for about the past 5 years. We call it a service line, but I think oncology is really the first piece and the main piece that has benefited from this approach, that we're a health system and that we all work together. And I think one of the biggest pieces that has changed that I've seen is our access to research and our access to clinical trials, but also the resources and the support. So I can tell you that CINJ is all in, and when they call us and they say, well, what do you need to support and to support your department and your hospital for research? And our research team has grown, right? From just Christine, raise your hand. But now we do have more resources. And that's really important for what everyone is saying in this room, because you're right, we as physicians don't have a lot of time to walk into the room. And we want to make sure we're screening the patients appropriately, like Dr. Schleicher said. So we have now people looking into, you know, to try and identify the right patients for these clinical trials. And then the layman to go into the room and talk to patients. Because I could tell you, as a patient who had to go through a consent form for myself for a clinical trial, it is really confusing. And there's blood work and there's lots of things. So the only thing I want to say is ask the questions, write things down, call us back. But yes, clinical trials are very involved. And there's a lot of commitment and a lot of time and a lot of energy that goes to being enrolled on a clinical trial. But the only way we're going to make progress is, you know, together. But we do appreciate all the help from CINJ. And because of our partnership with CINJ, we have expanded our portfolio of clinical trials here. So that means that we have access to all of the NCI trials, the National Cancer Institute trials, and even other drug pharmaceutical trials that are opening specifically for women with breast cancer. We've really increased, and if they have a trial there that's open, but patients are here, we can then go and get the trial open here to make it easier for our patients. So there's a lot going on here in terms of our clinical trials, but thank you so much for bringing everyone out here. I have to say it's been enlightening for me, so I appreciate it.
Okay, I would just like to add and say to the community, what we have to do, I think, as Black women going forward, let's replace our fear with our faith, okay, and take a chance. I heard someone once say, take a risk. The risk with the clinical trial will be worth the gain in your community in the future. So just keep that in mind. I also want to follow up what Charlotte was saying. We go out a lot of times and do vending at different places, and sometimes the population is kind of scarce. I thank you all so much for showing up tonight. But can I ask a real question real quick to you? What would take you to come out? Tonight we prepared this event. We have refreshments. We got nice door prizes. We even got a Coors Michael bag to give away. I don't know which reason you came, or did you come just to get the information? Can one or two people tell me what will get young people or continue to get people from your community to come out when they hear the word health fair?
I would like to respond to that if I can. I actually came from my mammogram. My mother passed away, not from cancer, but early. And basically in my family, most of us do. So I have this thing in the back of my mind, well, I'm not gonna live to be older later. Not that I'm very, very young, but so for me, I'm like, no, that's not happening. So I've just basically took it upon myself to seek out any benefit that I can get access to and try to educate myself and advocate for myself. So what happened is I went to get my mammogram. I happened to see a flyer. And so I took a picture of it and I showed up. It made no sense. If I can make time to watch a TV program or to do something that's not gonna help me longer term, that I can take a couple hours out of my day to participate in this event. Plus it's in my community and I want to support these type of activities, and I'm a Black woman, obviously, support these activities. So I think also coming off of COVID, you know, what I'd like to share with people is it gave me some time where I say the voices in my head got a little quiet and I was able to think about what was really important and what to start valuing. So I just want to know, I want to educate myself, one, hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it did, how can I better advocate for myself? But also, how can I better support someone who I come across who may be going through something like this? So even if it's just saying, Beth Israel has a great program, Sister to Sisters there to support you, check out these resources. Without telling people what to do sometimes, because COVID got messy. Everyone will agree, between bots and everybody having an opinion on everything. It actually turned me off where I'm not, I got to the one point where I'm like, well, I'm not volunteering any information to anybody. Everybody's got their own thing going on. But at the same time, if you're asked, it's still good to have information to share with people. And that's one thing that got me to come out today. And I just think the work that you're doing is just very important. And I want to educate myself, because cancer doesn't take a day off for anybody. And because you didn't have it or you don't have a family history doesn't mean it's not going to come knocking at your door. Or somebody's door who you love or just happen to come across. So that's what got me out here today.
Well, thank you very much for all of those words. I think just from hearing what everyone's saying, it's very clear that it takes a whole village. It takes a whole village. It's not just one thing or one day or one thought or one fair. It's a consistent, intentional, persistent effort by multiple groups, right? So from the medical professionals, like the Cancer Center director was mentioned, Dr. Sarah Jacob was mentioned, we as CINJ participating with all our affiliate sites as part of one network in the health system, that is part of this effort to make sure that all of these great trials are disseminated all throughout, where we have great research teams in all of the different facilities who spend a lot of time. We have navigators who go into the community, like you mentioned, that's needed. We have nurse navigators who follow up, research teams. It takes a lot of time for get one patient through a clinical trial. So in our corner of the world, this is what we try to do from the medical perspective, but obviously it's not perfect, and that is why we actively reach out to the community, have conversations with the community, let the community know that we put our money where our mouth is, and walk the walk, and that we care, right? So we are actively not only designing trials specifically for Black women, both at translational level and clinical research level, looking for trials that address issues specifically for Black women and opening them, and then hopefully disseminating it to the community. But then, on the other end, we are imploring women to get on the trials. We can't do all of this work, fight for funding from, the government agencies and what have you, where now everyone is talking about it, so now they're more eager to give out money for these types of projects, get all this stuff done, and then still women don't get on it or say no. Like that part where, the question was, what brought you here today? Thank you for saying, that you're doing this, you're advocating for yourself. This is what we're imploring women, hopefully through education, to see why it's important, going home to think about it, talking to their loved ones, some of you may be caregivers, but that's how it starts. That on the other end, that you also come forward and say, okay, I will take a leap of faith. There's, of course, a reason why there might have been reluctance to this point. We all know the historical reasons, the different reasons, but hopefully with one event, at a time, hearing and also seeing from the relationships, the hospital networks, and believing that they are trying to come to you where you're at, that you then take also that leap of faith to come and participate. And then when you see the outcomes, and then slowly but surely the tide turns. I think it comes from both sides, and it takes a leap of faith, it takes a huge network, it takes a lot of effort. But the goal remains the same, right? That we want to close that disparity gap. We want to improve survival for Black women. 40% higher death rates, I mean, that's terrible. It's a crisis. And so so this is why these conversations, I hope that people come out to, and I appreciate everyone that made time on a Friday afternoon to do that. But that's just what it takes, and it sounds like we're all in agreement of that.
When I look at breast cancer and when I was diagnosed, first of all, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I never said, why me? I said, why not me? I'm as good as anybody else. Black woman, white woman, Indian, anybody else. Because breast cancer does not discriminate. So, in saying that, I said, Lord, there must be a reason that you allowed this to happen to me. It is for me to come out here and to share with other women who may be possibly getting ready to go through this or who are still dealing with this, for me to be able to help them. These trials, the clinical trials that they're putting on, lets me know that we have to, as African American people, look past what has happened in the past. And we now have to realize that our future can't come forward if we don't take part in or participate in these trials. And that's basically it. That's why I'm out here educating women. That's why I'm out here telling them we have to start, because other races are getting cured and we are dying. I've had all of my aunts that have been diagnosed with breast cancer. I had a 17-year-old cousin who was diagnosed with breast cancer. It has to stop.
So at this point, I know that we don't want to take up too much of everyone's time for the day. We're going to wrap up, but please don't leave because we want to give out prizes and please have refreshments and food outside the door, and look at our resource tables, not only from MBI, but also from Sister to Sister, CINJ, and Komen, Susan G. Komen, who's a strong collaborator for this education series. So, and also a great resource for those who may be wondering, where do I get the right information? There are many resources out there on the internet, not the stuff you see on social media, please, but stuff like cancer.gov or NCCN, other resources like Susan G. Komen has a website, the American Cancer Society. Those are reputable sites where you can get valid information from. So please take some time to take some information and resources and ways to find out more information about trials out on the tables outside where there are refreshments. And I also want to take this time out to say a big thank you to our hosts, Dr. Schleicher, Dr. Jacoby, the staff at MBI, Aida, Loretta, everyone for helping to put this together here. Thank you so much.